Hey, in today's video, I'm gonna build a badass table like nothing you've seen before. I'm gonna introduce you into some new tools, some ideas that you've probably never thought about, and hopefully in the end, you realize how cool this table really is. Fortunately for me and for you guys, I found a client that was willing to let me run with an idea, and they had no guidance, so it was completely on me to be creative, which is probably my favorite thing, and really why I started building tables in the first place. I like creating ideas that are in my head and actually putting them in like on paper and then actually making them a reality. And probably the biggest downfall of running a table business is I find clients like what they've seen in the past or what I've done before, and it's really hard for them to visualize a new idea. So when a client is on board to just trust me, I feel like the table turns out even better. So I've had this idea in my head for a little while. I wanted to take some polished stainless, I wanted to combine some wood, and I wanted a base that wasn't symmetrical. Something you guys probably didn't know, or I don't know if I've ever mentioned it before, is I started out building hot rod type stuff in the car scene. And so this is a tool I use quite often. It's called a bead roller. I haven't personally seen anybody use it for a table build. And so I was like, well, might as well kind of bring that in and add a whole nother element to the builds. After doing this table, I realized there's a couple elements that I could have done with the bead roller that could just bring it up to an even another level. So hopefully I can come up with some ideas and put that down on a future build. Now basically the bead roller, it kind of embosses the metal, and so it actually gives it, like as you can see, like a three-dimensional look. Now one thing I had to figure out was how to mount these panels, especially behind there once the main table base is powder coated. So I have this riv nut tool, and it's basically a rivet that has a threaded insert inside of it. So you can put that in your panel, it rivets together, and then allows you to put like a 1/4 or whatever size you choose screw in there. I'd say probably my biggest challenge on this build was actually what I forgot to think out while drawing it on the computer. You'll see some of that come to you a little bit later in the video, but for the most part, it went pretty well. Now, just about all my builds, I box in the material. So this fab table works really well for creating that first 90 for the feet. And then I just get the same size material to kind of hold the material up. And just allows you to get it nice and square, and then just tack weld it together. It goes pretty quick actually. Something that's super important is figuring out where to put your tack welds at. Don't put them right in the middle of your weld if you're planning on running a super long weld. You'll end up with like a weird bump in the middle, and it's usually pretty obvious. Something I definitely pride myself in is actually trying to put down pretty welds. You won't see bird poop on my tables, that's for sure. Now I would say in the industry, if you really look at a lot of people's table bases, there is a lot of bad welds and a lot of ugly stuff underneath people's beautiful tops. That's not to say it won't work or it won't hold and last forever, but I don't always feel like the price matches the quality that's being put out. I'm gonna challenge you guys, next time you watch some of these YouTubers, really pay attention to the metal bases and see the difference between what I'm trying to do and what some of these guys are trying to do. And that's not to put anybody down, it's just to try to show you what my specialty is versus other people and why people spend as much as they do for my tables. Cost is always a discussion or a question by a lot of people. A lot of people don't understand why it costs as much as it does. And the reality is material prices are really high now. But also the amount of time that I take and put into these bases. It's not just a simple plasma cut or laser cut part that just bolts together. There's like hours and hours, like sometimes months of work that goes into these. So realistically, am I making that much money off these? Not really. If I could be a lot faster at this process, I could make some money. And to say I'm not making money would be false. It's just not as lucrative as a lot of people think it actually is. So talking about money, here's an example. So I've always used this old slip roller, and watch right here, it drops on me and it just broke. So I ended up bending this rod. It's kind of a specialty part. And because of that, I said it's finally time to invest in myself. So this is like a $6,000 slip roller. Literally probably all my profits off this table are going to another tool. But in the long run, it makes life so much easier. And it's totally worth investing back in yourself as long as you're able to. Now what's really cool about this slip roller is it's powered. So it's powered by 220. So it's a decently strong machine. Technically, I'm putting material through it that it's not supposed to be rated for, but I know it can easily do it. But what's so cool is you can fine tune it. So like that first time I went through wasn't quite enough. And then so I can just like crank it down a little bit, add a little bit more tension in there, give a little bit more curve, and there you have it, like a really close fitting part. Now I could go back through there and I could try to fine tune even more, but use an 1/8 inch material for capping this stuff. It's flexible enough that you can kind of bend it where you want it, as long as you get it close to start. I love this step when it actually starts to look like something you imagined in your head. So just a quick side note, back to welding. Your prep work is probably one of the most important things. So having clean material, I always wipe everything down with acetone first. I try to hit it with a grinder and just kind of clean everything up. Now, something to do with the welding, sometimes I push, sometimes I pull. In that case right here, first I was pushing, this one I'm pulling. They both have benefits. It's kind of just depends on the situation. I'll typically try to start a weld, like start to finish, the whole pass. A bunch of start and stops make it harder to actually finish a weld because you'll have a cold spot when you start and potentially hotter where it ended or where it meets. So you get these little high and low spots. Now this is some, I think you pronounce it die-cam die. I don't normally use this, but to try to show you guys kind of what I'm doing, I'm just removing all of the high spots essentially. So your goal is so there's no more purple on the material, and when all that purple is gone, you know everything's in the same plane. So you can kind of zoom in here in a second and you'll see a couple purple spots, and those are technically low spots. They're in the weld. So it just takes more work, a little bit more filing, and pretty soon you can get a perfectly smooth, straight weld. Now, in my opinion, you can wreck a cool design by not knowing how to metal finish your welds. And if you ask everybody on the internet, everybody's going to tell you using a file isn't necessary. I shouldn't be using a flap disc. And honestly, there's probably is techniques that would help and make this faster than how I'm doing it. I'm just currently doing something that works for me, but I am working on experimenting and trying some new ideas according to people's comments. But do what works for you and make sure you take pride in it. Now, earlier in the video, I mentioned I made some mistakes in the actual design process. So initially, I wanted to have a piece of wood that went in there that fit this whole void. I went all the way out to the end, but that's really hard and really difficult to find a piece of black walnut that is that wide, at least here locally. In the end, it actually worked out pretty well. So it goes metal, wood, metal. I think that's better because then it's not relying on wood on the one end for all that weight to be potentially keeping the table level. Let me know what you guys think of this design so far down in the comments. I think it's turned out pretty sweet. Don't forget a little bit of WD-40. Make sure you get all the little weld BBs, a little bit of spatter here and there. In the end, it always looks better, especially when you get it powder coated. You don't see these little tiny little dots everywhere. Something I get asked all the time is how heavy are these tables? And usually I just say really flipping heavy. But I think each one of these bases is probably around 70, 80 pounds at least. And speaking of issues though, here's another issue I had in the design process. I designed it so those metal bead rolled panels would go inside, but I never thought about how I would actually install them once everything was welded together. So I had to cut a access panel on the top side. You'll never see this. Realistically, I should have just done it on the laser and not had a big issue. So each one of them got cut out, and then it just allows it to slip in there. I was more just disappointed in myself that I didn't even realize it until I was about to send them to powder coat when they were all done. Just glad I noticed it before going to powder coat. To mount these wood panels inside the legs, I just used those 1/4-20 threaded inserts recessed into the wood, and obviously the riv nuts on the stainless, and that just allows me to use the 1/4-20 little Allen head button head screws. This time I went with like a a black-headed screw. They look shiny in this, but really they were pretty satin. It's just the way the light's hitting them. Now before you guys get to see a completed table, we had to head over to Nick over at Maverick Sawmill just south of Portland. As you guys know, I get all my big slabs from Nick, and I actually put my name on this slab I think like 3 years ago or 2 years ago. It was green, and I just saw the green pictures of it, and I was like, the grain in this is wild, had to put my name on it. At the time I didn't have a client, but it was one of those slabs that I didn't want to pass on. One thing I didn't notice though in the photos is it had a little bit more of a live edge vibe, not so straight on the sides. So a little bit of trimming to kind of bring it all into plane in the sense of making it look like a table. I didn't want anything crazy like where your chairs are sticking out all weird. Now usually for me, one of the first steps is kind of cleaning up and getting the shape of the overall table, right? So unless I'm leaving the raw chainsaw cut edge, I just like to make a shallow pass, potentially shallow at least, and just kind of clean it up so I have the overall dimensions of the table set. Now make sure if you have any of these voids in the table, you're getting all the bark out of the inclusions. You want to make sure it's nice and clean, because if you don't, the epoxy will kind of float those little pieces of sawdust, and then you'll end up seeing it in the epoxy. I almost always use a solid black color. I think it's kind of a timeless look. So far I haven't done any like vibrant colors for a top. And I think the big thing is the amount of money that these slabs cost. It's hard to justify like a wild color in the sense of hopefully it's not going to go out of style. And I think something like black that just fits black walnut will last forever. I do have a really wild idea that I haven't seen anybody use with epoxy coming up. So don't forget to subscribe so you see that video. Hopefully that one's coming out next couple months, but before then I've got more videos coming out. So the epoxy I'm using here to fill these cracks, I usually use a fast set epoxy. I'll do it in layers especially since I'm doing all black. But I got a little carried away and went a little bit too thick for how much epoxy I was actually pouring. The epoxy started to get really hot, so the only thing I could think of was to go grab some ice cubes from in the house. And honestly, it actually worked. Nothing cracked. Now, would I recommend you do the same thing? Probably not. But would I do it again? Sure, it worked that time. Honestly, I try to use like a quick set all the time, as much as I can get away with it, mainly because the deep pours just take so long to dry. And I only have, well, I shouldn't say only, it's a 30 by 40 shop, so I'm very fortunate in that sense. But it stopped me from doing anything else because I'm worried about the dust that's going to get into deep pour or the leaks that are going to come of it. Usually the fast set starts to set up before any of the leaks start happening, or if they do, they stop relatively quick on their own. But keep in mind, I'm always solid black. Now if I was going to do some translucent type pours, I'm going to use a deep pour, mainly because I want to make sure all those bubbles find their way to the top. I don't think it would work very well with a quick type set epoxy, especially even in layers. Now if you've watched any of my previous videos, you know I install C-channel in all of my builds. It just helps stabilize the wood. Now wood's going to move regardless. Is the C-channel going to stop it completely? No. Is it going to help? I like to think so. In the last video I published, I had someone comment and ask why I put the C-channel so close to my metal bases. They didn't feel like it was necessary. And realistically, it probably isn't. My bases are pretty robust, and it probably won't move, especially in that area. But realistically, it doesn't hurt to have the C-channel in there. I typically try to have at least 3 per top. If it's a really big one, I might do 4. But usually 3 is kind of my minimum. Don't forget to really look over your slabs and make sure you're not missing any cracks, especially the ones on the edges. I've missed this in the past and put finish on table, have to go back. It's always a pain in the ass because you got to sand off your finish and then start over. And another thing I do is a lot of bow ties on these tables. Now so far I haven't built a single table where there's a bow tie that's exposed on the top side. So far everybody's wanted them on the bottom. And honestly, it's kind of a good thing because at first I kind of sucked at them, and I've just kind of figured out techniques that work for me. I watched one of Cam Anderson's videos from Blacktail. He actually has a really cool video on one of these bow tie jigs, and I tried to just make one real fast on the bandsaw. It's not perfect, but it makes actually really good bow ties. So one of these days I'll actually make like a nice high quality one, maybe even out of metal, just because that'd be kind of different. When I first started doing bow ties, I thought you needed a ton of bow ties, as well as I didn't worry about the grain on the bow ties, so I had the grain go in the wrong direction. Realistically, they weren't strong bow ties. Don't be afraid to mess up. It's all part of learning. Just try to do better the next time, or if you do learn while doing something, don't be afraid to fix it. And you don't need fancy tools to do bow ties. Like, these are just some relatively cheap chisels I got from the local hardwood store. Tried to put a nice little edge on them, or I shouldn't say I did. I had a friend put a nice edge on them. They work really good, especially in the black walnut. I don't know a ton about woodworking, but I have been looking into some actual nice hand tools. If any of you guys have any recommendations of a really nice set of chisels, I'm definitely interested. Maybe comment down below which brand you guys recommend or where to get them. Now once you get your bow ties done, your epoxy's all done, all your cracks are filled with CA, it's time to start putting finish on, or I should say you sand the table first, which nobody wants to watch me sand the table forever, or watch Darren sand the table forever. But I use Rubio. It's definitely my favorite finish. I've tried experimenting with some different finishes. I have another video coming out that I use a different finish. It turned out really pretty. I just don't know how durable it is. Now once the bottom's done and all wiped off, I like to flip the table over. I typically will sand one more time on the top side just to make sure I haven't scratched anything between the process of flipping these over because they're so big and heavy. I personally like using one of these little orbital sanders with like a microfiber on there. Just helps spread the Rubio out. Once it's cured for that first time, hit it with a nice little red Scotch-Brite about 24 hours later. And then the second coat is where it really comes alive. So it starts to get the sheen and the grain really pops. It's probably my favorite part about building the table. This is definitely one of my favorite builds. I love the creative freedom I got on this one. And just being able to take an idea that was in my head and actually making it a reality, that's something that will never get old. Now I say this in every single one of my videos. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, comment below. I'd love to hear what you think about this one. Is this something you could see in your own home, or is it too wild?